Awesome. Well, welcome everyone to the September Dependency-Track community meeting. Thanks for joining us. This is the first time we're using Zoom. So it's a new platform for a lot of us. So just be a little patient as we figure out the different features on Zoom. So this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to YouTube. So if you have to step out or if you need to take a look at the notes later, you can review the recording on YouTube later. And the slides should be available as well. So here it looks like there's a chat and Q&A function. So if you have specific questions, feel free to add it to the Q&A section. I'll be monitoring both. And if there's enough time in each section, we can answer a couple questions, but there will be a general Q&A section at the bottom for any other questions at the end of the presentation. So I think we can go to the next slide for the agenda. So we'll first be going over the latest project updates, and then we'll be going into a demo of version 4.12, and then we'll be going over a new architecture, I would say, a vulnerability database for Dependency-Track. So that should be interesting. And then lastly, we'll end on Q&A. Oh, it looks like host has turned off Q&A. I'll take a look at that. But first, I'd like to turn it over to Niklas for project updates, and I'll work on the Q&A on the side.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caroline. And yes, as Caroline mentioned, this is the first time for us using Zoom. Previously, we were using the IBM WebEx, which was generously sponsored by Caroline and Melba, who are also on this call. So thanks so much again for getting us started with the community meetings there. Yeah, regarding the project updates, as usual, we released bug fix versions since the last time we met here. In this case, it was 4.11.6 and 4.11.7. 4.11.6 was released on August 10th. It fixed a breaking change in Trivi's server API that we used for the Trivi integration. It fixed validation errors for BOMs or for XML BOMs that contained multiple namespaces. So if it contained a namespace other than the cyclone-dx one, validation was failing. This was fixed. Also, the VEX export returned invalid cyclone-dx, which was kind of unfortunate now that we enabled validation for uploads. So this was fixed as well. And then other like smaller backports or smaller fixes we backported from the current version 4.12.0. Then on August 14th, we released version 4.11.7, which just fixed a minor issue in the REST endpoint returning not enough fields, or it was missing fields that are promised in the REST API specs. For version 4.12, just a reminder, this is not yet released. We are in the process of working on it and releasing it. We talked about it in the last few meetings already. So just to recall, one of the major things we changed is a Java 21 baseline, which should not affect you if you are using the container images. If you are, for whatever reason, running this in a like custom Java environment or custom VM, then you need to worry about this and you need to like update your Java installation, I guess. We're also moving away from Swagger 2 to OpenAPI version 3. So if you are currently reliant on Swagger 2 API documentation, you will need to adjust accordingly. We will not be providing Swagger 2 going forward. Also more like an internal change, we are migrating from Java Enterprise Edition namespaces to Jakarta EE version 10, the latest one. Again, mostly just internal. If you happen to develop on Dependency-Track, you will notice this or have already noticed this, that some namespaces or APIs have changed. Further, in version 4.11, you could enable BOM processing v2, which is like more performant, is atomic, and provides a lot of bug fixes over the legacy implementation. This was an option. You could enable it, but you didn't have to. Now it is the default, and you cannot disable it. There's no legacy implementation anymore. So if you are curious or if you're worried about this, if this negatively affects you, you could always, before upgrading to version 4.12, you could always enable this experimental option and then just like assess how it hits you, if it hits you at all. Also, we introduced tag management features, various ones. There's a link on the slide and the QR code that brings you to the last community meeting where we demoed a few of those new functionalities. So you are encouraged to look at those as well again. Then since the last meeting, there are a few new things for version 4.12 also. One thing that was contributed from a contributor is a test button for notifications. So at the moment, you can configure alerts in the UI, right? But testing them requires to trigger the actual event that the notification is listening on. Now you can just click a button and the sample notification will be sent out, which makes it a lot easier to test whether like the Slack integration works or your webhooks are sent as you expect. So this should be a big help. You can now also restrict notifications to projects with specific tags. You could, since I think 4.8 or something, you could limit notifications to individual projects already, but you had to select again, individual projects. And if you have a lot of projects, that doesn't really scale that well. So now you can limit to tags as well, which makes it a lot more, a lot easier to manage. Also, you can now, in the last version, I think we introduced BOM validation, and we got the feedback that some users were struggling with tools generating invalid CycloneDX JSON or XML files. And with invalid, I just mean invalid according to the spec, not not parsable. Before we introduced validation, you could upload a technically invalid BOM and it would still get processed, right? But with enabling spec validation or BOM validation, this was no longer possible. So we had users reaching out that said, hey, there's one project and that one project has an invalid BOM. So we have to disable BOM validation for the entire instance, which pretty much diminishes all the enhancements that we thought would BOM validation would bring. So now you can limit the BOM validation to certain projects with certain tags, or you can disable BOM validation for certain projects with certain tags, which should be a good enhancement for you if you ran into these problems earlier. Also, for the Trivia integration, if you are using the Trivia integration or have been using it, you may have noticed that it broke twice already since we introduced it. And that was mostly due to field names changing in the server API of Trivia. And as it turned out, this is mostly a byproduct of us using the REST API of Trivia. There's also a protobuf-based API. And protobuf is not a subject to field name changes being a breaking change in the API because protobuf is position-based, right? So now we change to the protobuf-based API of Trivia, which should hopefully bring more stability for the Trivia integration going forward. So hopefully no more breaking changes until they really introduce an intentional breaking change to the API. There's also support for component.authors, which is a new field in CycloneDX version 1.6. Previously, there was just a singular author. Now we support multiple. And in general, we got a few reports that the findings API was a bit slow or sluggish. The findings API is also what you see when you click in the UI on the audit findings tab. We improved the performance of that, and it should be much, much better in this version. And I will demo 3 of these changes now, namely the test button for notifications, the restriction of notifications to projects with specific tags, and the bypassing or enabling of BOM validation for projects with specific tags. So with that, let me just figure out how to reshare my screen here. Wait, in fact, I don't need to. Stop share. Okay. So I'm already logged into a Dependency-Track test instance, a local test instance. And the first thing I would like to share is how you can include or exclude projects from validation. In the configuration, if you are an administrator, you can see in the configuration there's a BOM formats option. And here you could previously just enable or disable validation. And now you have the choice between enabled, globally enabled, globally disabled, enabled only for specific tags, or disabled only for specific tags. And what I would like to demo here is enabling BOM validation for specific tags, and I'm just going to use foo. You can use as many as you want. It's just that one tag out of these that you select here need to match. Saving this here, and now creating a project with title invalid. And I'm going to select an invalid BOM. Now remember, I selected enabled for projects with tags. So if I upload this now, it should fail. It did not. Did I configure the wrong thing? Enable for tags. Oh, wait, sorry. Yes, correct. Enabled for tags. So this currently did not validate, right? Sorry, I mixed that up. So this did not validate. That is why it uploaded. If I now change the tag or add the tag foo here, which I configured in the settings, and then I try to upload again, invalid SBOM, it's now failing. So this works as expected. Sorry for the small confusion there. I don't know why I mixed it up. So this is how essentially you can enable or disable this feature at scale, if you will. It makes it a lot easier. With that out of the way, let's go to the notifications. And first, I would like to demonstrate the new test button. So I'm going to create a new alert here, demo, outbound webhook. And I have a local instance of webhook.site here, which will receive the webhook notifications that we will send. Just have to adjust this small thing here so it works within my Docker Compose setup. And now let's say I want to send notifications for the events new vulnerability and BOM consumed, right? Saved. So if I go back here, create the notification demo. Oh, wait, sorry. Again, why am I doing this? I wanted to show the test button, sorry. Right, so I configured this now. Now there's a new button, perform test. I click this one, I should see notifications coming in here. And there are two because I selected two notification groups, right? New vulnerability, which you can see here, and BOM consumed. You will notice that these are just like placeholder values, but they contain all the fields that you would expect from these notifications. So if you have like custom processing logic that you use when you receive those webhooks, this is a great way to test them also. Yeah, that was pretty quick to show. And then the feature of limiting notifications to tags again, you could, as I said earlier, you could already limit to specific projects. I have two projects here. I could select them both, and then the notification rule would only apply to notifications related to those projects. But this is too tiresome for me, so I will just add a new tag here, which is just bar. Submit this one. So I created this empty project already, and I will upload a valid BOM. So these are the old ones, right? I will just delete them here, and we should not see new notifications coming in because the rule does not apply because I don't have the tag bar on my project. And we can wait a while longer here, but there's nothing, there won't arrive anything. So again, if I change my tag to bar and then save this and upload the valid BOM again, there's a new webhook here for BOM consumed, and it contains the entire BOM. So yeah, this works as expected. So phew. Also, one thing to note here is that you may have noticed there is a switch here that says include active children of projects. So this also works when you assign a parent project a tag, and then all of its children will inherit this behavior. So if you use parent-children relationships in Dependency-Track, you can make use of them here. Just tag the parent project, and it will apply to all of the children as well. Yeah, right. And if you configure limit to projects and limit to tags, then it's like a conjunctive logic relationship, for lack of better words. So it has to either match one of the projects that you selected, or it has to have a tag that you configured. Yep. So those were the demos that I had. Let me just switch back here. So with all of this, you may be asking like, okay, this is all nice. And you talked about this last community meeting as well. So when is version 4.12.0 finally coming? And the good news is that as of yesterday, there are only like 4 open issues left assigned to this milestone. There are also a few like contributor PRs that we are looking at, but realistically, this should be releasable by next week, hopefully. So the long wait will be over by then. There are also some news for Hyades. So for those who are new here or who don't know what Hyades is the upcoming version 5 release of Dependency-Track. It's codenamed Hyades just to like separate it from the current stable version. And we are still obviously working on this to get it to a GA state. So I just want to share some new changes that we made. First off, the construction of permissions to be more fine-grained. This was a contribution. So at the moment, you can assign permissions along the lines of portfolio management, and now you can like assign more fine-grained permissions like portfolio management update, portfolio management delete, create, view, etc. So now you can like give people a limited set or a more limited set of permissions. I hope that makes sense. We're also making more and more performance enhancements for various REST endpoints, for example, for those that fetch findings, for those that fetch vulnerabilities, that fetch projects. All of those tend to get very slow and sluggish once you have like tens of thousands of projects. So we're making more and more enhancements for this, either by hand tweaking the SQL queries that we use, or by now finally getting a return of focusing on Postgres, because Postgres has certain data types that make things faster and more efficient. For example, there's a native UUID data type that is a lot smaller on disk than the string-based or the text-based data type. And JSON-B, like for JSON data structures, makes it easier to index and also to store. Also, just hot off the press, essentially, we addressed a problem of database migrations. In case you're not aware, at the moment, in Dependency-Track version 4, whenever you start the API server or the application itself, it executes database migrations. It performs or it seeds the database with default values, for example, with SPDX licenses, with default permissions, default users, etc. So once you get to a point where you can scale this out locally to multiple API server instances, it is kind of a waste of computation to always do this every time a new container starts up. So what we did is we separated this into a separate initializer container, which now performs these tasks. Like it performs the database migrations, it performs the seeding, and the API server containers now don't have to do it anymore, which makes them faster to start up, and like also reduces load on the database as well. A nice side effect of this is, I don't know, like if you ever deploy Dependency-Track to Kubernetes or a Kubernetes Kubernetes-like platform like OpenShift, what container orchestrators like Kubernetes like to do is they kill your container, your pod, if its health checks or its liveness checks didn't pass for a while. And this obviously does not play well with database migrations, which could take a long time, like a few 15 minutes or something in the worst case. So you can end up in a situation where you deploy a new version of Dependency-Track, it executes the migrations, and then after a minute or two, Kubernetes thinks this container is dead because it's like the liveness check is not passing. So it restarts the container and the whole thing starts over again. You're essentially trapped in a loop. By having a separate container that you can run as a Kubernetes job or as an init container, you can avoid these complications. And this is what this new work essentially allows for. Yeah, we also updated the Helm chart already for Hyades. So this is already built in. Oh, sorry. Yeah, this was all for Hyades for now. Now for the final topic of this, and this is kind of, we really wanted to do this for a very long time. And we spoke about this in a previous community meeting as well, when it came to like supporting new tech stacks in the Dependency-Track project. The current situation of how we as a project integrate with vulnerability databases like the NVD is kind of interesting, because we only support a small subset of available public databases, which is like NVD, GitHub advisories, and OSV. But there are many more available out there, especially for Linux distributions. Like Amazon Linux has their own database, Red Hat has their own database, Oracle, SUSE, Wolfie, and these all like may or may not be part of the larger database like OSV. I think OSV integrates a few of those, but not all of them. And over time, we got more and more requests from users, hey, can you please add Amazon Linux vulnerabilities to Dependency-Track? So yeah, there's this certain limitation that we have currently. Also, it is kind of a waste of resources that every single Dependency-Track instance downloads and processes all these databases over and over again. In addition, like we have only the NVD enabled per default, because GitHub advisories requires a database and a GitHub token, an authentication token. And yeah, as I said again, like it causes unnecessary load on public infrastructure. You may have noticed, or you may have read the news essentially at the beginning of the year that the NVD was having availability issues. And that was surely by part caused by Dependency-Track instances like requesting it too often or too much. So we really want to like be good players in the open field. Essentially, we don't want to put public infrastructure under such stress if we can avoid it. Also, a big problem still is that the NVD does not support package URL, which is like the major identifier for components, for software components. So the out-of-the-box experience of Dependency-Track, where it only downloads NVD data by default, and then for everything else reaches out to Sonatype OS index, it's not great, to be honest. Really, there should be one data set that you get when you start Dependency-Track, and it should work out of the box. It should not have to rely on third-party services like OS index. Also, resolving vulnerability aliases, like this CVE is exactly the same as this GHSA vulnerability, or like it gets even worse when you consider Debian-specific vulnerabilities or Go-specific vulnerabilities. This kind of resolving of relationships gets very hard. If you first download NVD, then you download GHSA, and while you're downloading, you're trying to resolve all these different relationships, right? That gets very complicated, especially if you consider that some users will only download the NVD and some will only download GHSA, some will only download OSV, and then others will download a like wild combination of the three. This would be much, much easier if we could just download all of the things, all of the databases, and then as a post-processing step, resolve the aliases before we serve this data to users to use it. Also, making data corrections in the way this currently works is very, very hard. If we make a mistake in parsing NVD CVE data or OSV data, fixing this is really a problem because everyone has their own data set. So this is a huge, huge challenge for us currently to address these things. So what are we trying to solve essentially? We want to build a pre-compiled database specifically for Dependency-Track's needs. It should be built centrally and then consumed by all the Dependency-Track instances. It should be sourced from many public data sources, which of course includes the big databases like, again, OSV, GitHub advisories, etc., but also the different Linux distribution-specific ones that I mentioned. We want to have package URL and verse as first-class citizens. Just a reminder, this is how a package URL looks like. You have a type, which is Maven in this case, namespace, org.dependency-track, then a name, dependency-track, and a version. And then for version ranges, there's this verse standard or specification, which like gives you a canonical way of expressing version ranges. It is very cool, it is very handy, and both package URL and verse are now under TC54, which is also the ECMA effort that CycloneDX is under, for example. So we want to base our database on these standards or specifications. Additionally, like you may ask yourself, hey, why don't you just use OSV? OSV has a lot of this already. We also need to support hardware. Dependency-Track is used for hardware already, and hardware support is mostly based on CPEs, because package URLs, of course, is just software. The NVD also lists hardware vulnerabilities for processors, for like server hardware. So we still need CPE support in whatever we build next, unfortunately. But there's also like more advanced efforts for hardware identification. There's the GS1 global trade item number, for example, or the global model number. I haven't seen a database that is using these yet, but whatever we build next should have this in mind, that at least there might be additional identifiers that we need to adopt. Moving on this, the database should be updated at least daily. I think that is the minimum frequency that everyone can agree on. Of course, we would like to update this more frequently, but we will see, like, this depends on the implementation, how costly it is to update it. We also see this trend, or this new way of reducing false positives, if you will, via like reachability analysis. And like in CycloneDX, you can already express call stacks, so applications or BOM generators can already tell you, is this component actually used and where it is used. And databases like Go's vulnerability database already include import data and symbols for vulnerabilities. So it would really be very cool if we could somehow marry these and have the database support this kind of data, so that Dependency-Track can help in avoiding false positives or reducing the noise. And I think I mentioned it before, CDXGen, another tool in the OWASP realm, that tool can already generate reachability information in BOMs. So the data is already there, we just need to make it, or to put it to use, essentially. We also would really like to offer a way to have the community and also us maintainers make corrections to wrong data, right? Inevitably, we will like make mistakes in the parsing logic. Database information from upstream might be wrong, like the NVD sometimes updates stuff too late, or whatever have you. It would be really cool if we could have a way to fix this for our users and fix it transparently in one place. So this would be great to have. Also, of course, because we are like, we are not a company, right? We are not Google. We cannot afford running a public web service for the entire world to consume. So this really needs to be cheap, or in the best case, free for us to operate, which brings us to preferably this being file-based. So we can host it on like public container registries, on GitHub releases, whatever. Or we could also like send it to a cheap CDN, if you will. If we were to run this as a public service, we need staff to ensure this is reachable all the time. This is like not realistic for us right now. Also, it should be optimized for continuous consumption. If you think about it, like if you look at tools like Trivy or Gripe, I think a common theme that is happening is they download the same database, like in regular intervals, and this database can be a few gigabytes in size. We would really like to avoid that if we can. So it would be good to have a mechanism to essentially say, hey, I downloaded data up to this point already. Now give me everything that changed since then. And that, of course, can have varying degrees of being dynamic, if that makes sense. So this could happen in like chunking the database, so that one chunk contains everything that was updated since last week, for example. That already would be a huge help if we don't have to download this thing over and over again every day. I already mentioned this. There are also non-goals, of course. For this, we are not planning to compete with any existing vulnerability database. We're not trying to like compete with OSV, not at all. We are also not trying to cater to tools other than Dependency-Track, although that would be a nice side effect if we can make it work. But like for the sake of having progress for our own project, this should not be the main focus. We're also not trying to get rid of commercial data sources, be it OSS Index, Sneak, or even VulnDB. We still believe like there's value in having these, and we will make sure that they still continue to work with Dependency-Track going forward. So this is really about public databases and merging them into one thing that then every Dependency-Track instance can consume, no matter if you have like a Sneak subscription or not. I also mentioned a few tools that already do something like this. There's Gripe's database that is specifically for the Gripe tool from Anchor. Aqua Security's Trivy has an own database. And like the OWASP tool, DepScan, also has the vulnerability ID from vulnerability database from AppThread. And all of the above are like permissibly licensed. They're all MIT or Apache 2 licensed. So if we wanted, we could make use of them. We don't necessarily have to start from scratch, although because those tools are tailored for a specific purpose, not for third-party consumption necessarily, they may change without us noticing or without us getting a notice. So this is something to keep in mind. And this is all like a lot of talking, of course, but in the end, we really need your help, like the community's help on this. We believe that this is a good thing that the community could take on or even lead, like participate or even lead, because it does not necessarily require in-depth knowledge about how Dependency-Track works. This is really like a well-defined boundary, if you will. You don't need to know what Dependency-Track is doing with that data. You just need to provide it in a certain format with certain requirements. So this is, I think, a good possibility for everyone who wanted to contribute to the project, but didn't know where to start or didn't want to dive into the Java code base, if you will. Also, this brings us to the next point. You will have a free choice of technology. You will not be bound to Dependency-Track's existing Java stack, because like this entire conversation came up earlier in the context of, hey, can we add Go to the Dependency-Track project? I would really love to work in Go, and here's an opportunity to do that. Write this in Go or do it in Python. We have all the choices available. Also, like because this is the vulnerability database for Dependency-Track that everyone will get the first time they start the project or the application, this will really have a very, very, very big positive impact on literally everyone using it. So this is kind of high visibility in management speak. So yeah, this is a good opportunity to contribute, I think. We already raised a GitHub issue for it. There's also a Google Doc linked to that issue. It is public. You can read the documentation. It has all the background information and the motivation for this whole thing, and like a list of requirements that we have already. And a small, like, how do I say it? A small description of how vulnerability databases are currently mirrored in Dependency-Track, just to get this starting. And as I like alluded to multiple times already, we would really love contributions from the community. And like, if you want to lead this, even better. Just let us know. If you want to have added permissions to the Google Doc, just request it. Otherwise, comment on the GitHub issue, ask us questions or propose things. We appreciate everything that you have. Yeah, so this is something we really want to move forward on. Yep, and this is all.
Yeah, it looks like it's an interesting topic for many. There have been a couple suggestions and references from people. I guess let's go for Marlon's question. Can we expand the scope and also store licenses?
I don't have anything particularly against it. I just think it would like expand the size of the database quite a bit. But maybe someone else has an opinion on this. I'm not that opinionated on that.
I wouldn't necessarily support licenses in terms of a minimal viable, but I think you have enough data there, like with VERS and that sort of thing, be able to capture the nuances like, well, this version range has this license and this other version range has this other license. I think if you left the architecture open, you could theoretically support that in the future, but I certainly wouldn't wait for it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Having an MVP is definitely the first step here. Great. So it looks like there is one question from Ollie. Is this targeted for Hyades or 4.x for the vulnerability database?
I think this should work for both version 4.x and Hyades. I would not necessarily bind this to Hyades, especially considering that people who work on this will want to see benefits soon, right? And quick. So let's not bind this to 4.x or Hyades. Should work for both.
Okay, great. Yeah, so there's a couple of suggestions. I'm not sure if it's actually a question, but Adam shared that what Renovate maintainers do is they publish an offline version of OSB as a package for use across many of their version deployments and CLIs. So there's a link of that. I think it's good as like prior art. And Marlon also shared a list of the vulnerability sources that Aqua published. I think that's a good reference as well.
Mm-hmm. I will get those added to the Google Doc.
Yeah, we'll have to check how to get the chat once we record this meeting. Still new to Zoom, but I'm sure we'll get the information.
Yep.
There's another suggestion from Ollie to maybe add scorecard, OSSF scorecard data as well to all of this database.
Scorecard is interesting because I know that Jan from the CycloneDX project recently checked with a few people in the community how they actually use scorecards. And Jan, maybe we can even unmute you if you want. But I think you didn't find any good evidence that people put this data to good use. So I'm not sure how useful including this here would be.
Yeah, the thing with scorecard is that it evaluates the current status of a certain project, and it has no idea how the releases of a certain version are actually produced. So let's say you're using that Java library produced 2 years ago, and you want to find out if this was a valuable addition to your project, and you look up that scorecard and you find out, well, the score is perfect. Well, what you don't know is that the score was bad 2 years ago, and that the version that you are currently planning on using was built in a malicious build environment. You don't get that information from a scorecard, so this is one of the many examples people and communities found why they don't use scorecards when it comes to evaluating certain packages or stuff. But it's just one example where I found that it could lead people to wrong decisions. So I would say if scorecards are a thing for you, you probably should evaluate the scores and build the score values yourself and do your conclusions yourself. But depending on foreign data, it's risky. So this is just my personal finding that I concluded from several talks with people and communities.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I've also done similar kind of, not research, because that sounds too formal. But I have taken away that bad scorecard values can be useful, and good scorecard values are not useful at all. But That's kind of the reality I think that we're in with scorecard. The bad ones are useful, but good is not an indication of actual goodness.
We're touching on the common life cycle enumeration. That's something we all need to know the status of something. But then we have the problem with third-party attestations, which Skit is trying to solve, but that could be an all-night discussion.
And there is a
So how do people get involved in doing this, Nicholas, and in helping with this effort?
So in the first stages, I'm really looking for people to like visit this fancy QR code here or the link below it, the GitHub issue. There is a Google Doc link to it in the description. And as mentioned earlier, you can request edit permissions on it to comment on stuff or to even edit the proposal. And then eventually I'm hoping we can get a working group or something like that started to work on this, to design a solution and to build an MVP. That's the path forward that I see. So it boils down to please reach out if you're interested in helping. Yeah, thanks, Ollie, for posting. I think one thing that is mentioned in the doc and that kind of touches on your ask about scorecards, there is data that is kind of volatile, like EPSS data, or if a vulnerability is present in c-scrm. So this information we could potentially add as well as an enrichment step, essentially.
Yeah, I think there is a related question about operational health or common life cycle. If it's I don't know if it is supported, dead, those kind of issues. Should we capture that as well? I don't know if there is any other sources we can fetch or collect this data, right? Like, is there any other open sources we can fetch?
Isn't that scorecard?
I mean, no, I mean, scorecard is beyond that, right? Like, I mean, they have their own metrics on how they calculate the operational health, but I think they don't necessarily check if the life cycle of the project. I mean, they may try to calculate a score for it based on the activity. But I don't know.
They have a guessing framework. If there are very few commits and very few committers, you get a very low score, but that typically doesn't mean the project is dead. In many cases, it's just a maintained project that doesn't need more love. So the scorecards are dangerous as a source, but in some cases it's useful to see as an indicator that I need to investigate something a bit more. But I think we should, I love talking about expanding this work to craziness, but starting this and trying to get the base working is enough of a task right now.
I think
Yes, agreed.
The MVP, we just focus on vulnerability, but we need to make sure that it can be extended in future if needed, right? Like the data. If we
But since some of us are in the European community zone, there should be, we should investigate at least if there's any way of using all the money they're throwing out now for CRA and CRA related stuff for building something like this. We can surely point to the fact that most of us have been blind by the problems in the MOD and US government.
That is a very, very good point. Yes.
But there is a lot of money being flooded, and maybe we can get some students or others to help us.
Yeah, there are, like, in general, there are many grants that we could apply to if we have like a good proposal. I just think that in the past we didn't make a good job of proposing anything to those.
The problem is we can't use owasp as the organization that applies for it, because OWASP is a US-based foundation.
Right.
So we have to come up with something else.
I mean, a contributor to the CycloneDX project for the Rust implementation, I think he used his own company to apply for a grant.
Yep.
Maybe something along those lines could help.
Yep.
OWASP-EU, yeah.
Yeah, I think there is an OWASP in Brussels, but since it's a division of the US-based organization, it just doesn't.
Actually, it's not. We do have an OWASP entity. It is completely independent.
Okay.
So in this particular case, it might actually be an advantage. But
Absolutely.
Nicholas, maybe you, me, and Star can probably have a conversation on that offline.
Yep. Okay, do we have any more questions?
One just came in from Dennis. Are you aware of potential activities by the DFN in Germany to create an independent vulnerability database?
I should probably know this because I'm German, but what is the DFN?
Yeah, we suspect you to know all German things, Niklas. That's just the base.
Yeah, I can unmute myself. Sorry, I'm here for the first time. Deutsches Forschungsnetzwerk, and this is only something that I haven't digged into much.
Is it like the university network or something like that? Research.
Yes, it's research based. Well, we're
Okay.
linked. The company that I work for is linked through another organization to that. So I have no direct information. I just wanted to know, since I thought you're all experts in the group, and some of you are in Europe, maybe you've heard of that. I'm not 100% sure what the status
particularly,
is.
but the NISA is tasked with building something for Europe. Interestingly enough, NISA earlier, I think it was this year in February something, became a CNA in the CV database, which puts them under US government, which is interesting. But they're as part of the NIS2 directive, and later CRA, when that is published, they have to build something, and we hope it's not going to be a separate database.
Funnily enough, like just yesterday, someone requested Dependency-Track to add support for the Chinese National Vulnerability Database.
Yeah.
And I think like this use case will come up, that people have regional databases, and because they sell products in that area, they will need, potentially due to regulations, they need to look up in those vulnerability databases. On the other hand, like not everyone will have that need, and not everyone will appreciate having Chinese vulnerabilities in their database. So if we want to support this, we need to somehow make it modular, like that people can opt into downloading that or opt out, depending on how we build it. And I think this database, like from the DFN, would fit right in. And if ENISA builds something, the same goes for that.
This world could try to unify on a standardized format and access protocol, that would be an improvement. I mean, I think the OSV format is managed by OpenSSF in a standardization process. At least Google doesn't control the format, which is a huge step.
Theoretically.
Yeah, and I think the Google Doc also mentions this, like OSV is there. There's also the CVE 5.0, 5.1 schema that could be used. And we could even look into using CycloneDX, like bill of vulnerabilities. That is also a possibility. We just have to look at what is already there and what we can reuse. What a generic sentence, anyway. Yep.
I think it might also be quite useful to get Tom Ulrich to opine on this new database. because I mean he's published so much with like detailed analysis of what NVD's done wrong, and he's spoken about sort of creation of basically a global database. So he has opinions to the hilt, and I'm sure he'd have useful insights.
We have a vulnerability database working group that meets on Tuesdays. Lately, it has been more of a discussion and grumpy old men group. But the idea there was to create a list. I think there's a Google Doc with a list of vulnerability databases without making any recommendation. But we have discussed this in the owasp-SBOM forum for quite a while, and I strongly say that I compared this with DNS many years ago, where we had a DNS route, in fact, managed by US government, because John Postel was employed in a US university and got his salary from the government. So the US said that DNS is our property. And the community gathered together and built a multi-stakeholder organization and created the ICANN. And after a while, we took over, right? We have to find a way here to have a federated database, and that's what Tom and I and many others have discussed. Some way of interacting and being able to exclude countries that we don't trust, but still, I don't want the EU to build a competitive database to the MVD. I want something that works together with MVD, right? But the current crisis in MVD shows us all that relying on a single public-funded, very small organization is a problem, because I mean worldwide we're getting regulations that we have to check for vulnerabilities, and if that depends on 25 people in a government institution in the US, then something is desperately wrong.
Is it even 25? I thought that they were actually made a whole pile of holes in their organizational structure.
I think the problem now was that they didn't even get funding for the 25 they used to be a few years ago when we met them in the SBOM forum.
Exactly.
Marlon asked in the Q&A that did we ever consider trying to partner with some of the existing solutions like TriviDB?
I think the consideration is definitely part of this, like of this whole initiative. If the Trivi database matches all of those requirements that we have, then sure, let's just use it. But there's always the downside that they built their database for Trivi. They will change stuff depending on what Trivi needs. And they will not care if we need like an old schema, for example, or we need fields that they will remove. And the same problem will exist for the GRIPE database and the DepScan database that I also mentioned.
So maybe we should bring these together in a room and discuss whether we can get a unified format and some sort of management of that format that works together. So we have a format that is extensible if they want to move faster, but still share the base properties. And if there are too many prima donnas that can't agree with each other in the room, then that's just life. But at least I think that would be a good first step, because the cost for all of these companies that manage this is huge.
Yeah. But I would really hate to get like perfectionism or whatever we want to call it. Like I get the urge to build something that fixes a lot of problems for everyone. But
yeah, we shouldn't let that delay, but I think we should open up the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I just don't want to get this into a way of like making progress in Dependency-Track itself.
I didn't suggest a year of community work, because then the problem is more urgent. I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think AIC, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, would love to join the working group, but would need clarification on purpose. But from the discussion, it seems like there's a lot of different ways this could be implemented, a lot of different ideas on what should belong in the database. So I think the working group would involve like clarifying on all that and agreeing on a standard and having that bake into Dependency-Track in an independent way from what it sounds like.
Yeah.
What is the best way to get involved?
I would say just have a look at the GitHub issue that is linked here, or the QR code. Look at the doc, and then maybe just comment if you're interested in helping, or if you have any questions on like what is written there. And then I think we need to give people a little bit of time to come forward and to like say, hey, we want to join this. But yeah, then going forward, I think reaching out to those people who said they're interested and forming a working group. I know this sounds very generic, I'm sorry, but
No,
this is how I would imagine.
I was thinking, I believe you mentioned there's a meeting that is regular. So maybe coming in and listening to the purpose, the high level thinking in those meetings can be helpful.
Yeah, I think those, Ollie, I think you mentioned the vulnerability database working group, or yeah.
Yep. But that is a bit far from this topic, but it's related. What we're talking about here is taking the output of vulnerability databases and making it very efficient to distribute it to Dependency-Track installation base. That group is discussing the disaster of vulnerability databases and how to raise quality and try to find pointers to all of these vulnerability databases and analyze it. I think I have a document on it. Give me a few seconds.
I guess I thought they were the same, but
No.
they're separate tracks. Okay, got it. Got it. Interesting.
Yeah, and we're at the top of the hour, so I think we're gonna have to wrap up. But if you'd like to continue the discussion, I suggest going to our Slack channel, Project Dependency Track, on Slack. And it seems like there's a lot of interested parties, people that want to keep discussing this database implementation. So definitely just put down your thoughts there. We don't currently have a survey on Zoom, but we're looking into that. So yeah, put all of your ideas on Slack or on GitHub itself. Add an issue if you have a new idea. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming, and look forward to seeing everyone next month. All right,
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.